in the 1992 election? Their answer was education. Now, I want to ask John Chubb and Jonathan Kozol, both of whom have spent their lifetimes looking at American education. I'd like to ask you to talk to each other about how you think this idea that's being debated in the campaign, that's in the platform of the two parties, vouchers, would make a difference in the quality of education. Jonathan Kozol.
First, Bill, I have to say that video is just terribly moving. As you know, I started out as a teacher 25 years ago, and it's just heartbreaking to see how little has changed, still segregated, still unequal after all these years. The voucher plan that President Bush has put forward is a frivolous plan. It's frivolous and it's dangerous. The $1,000 voucher he's offering won't buy a poor family anything. But for a middle-class family, a family at the $40,000 level, for example, a family who's already got part of the tuition for a private school, that $1,000 may just make the difference and will subsidize their flight from the public system. I'm frightened at the possibilities that we might see a splintering of the common school tradition into separate little enclaves of individual self-interest, everyone competing against everyone else.
George, you've got a good bit to reply to. You all try to address this between the two of you.
I think, and not only think, but on the basis of all the research that we've done in the last 10 years, I'm really utterly convinced that if you have a system where parents are choosing, a number of positive things happen. Number one, the schools in this marketplace, if you will, become focused on the concerns of parents and kids, doing right by them first, because they have to or the parents won't come. And when parents become number one and not just another interest group, schools tend to push more resources down to the school site. They tend to treat their teachers better because teachers are really the crucial ingredients in education. So if you have more resources in the school, treat teachers given more authority over the educational process, schools reaching out to get parents involved, which obviously is crucial, and finally, kids being in schools that they want to be in. You put all those things together and more parent involvement, kids there voluntarily, teachers empowered, more resources. Generally, that is a recipe for a good education, and I think that you're far more likely to get those ingredients in schools that are concerned about parents first rather than concerned about the superintendent or concerned about the Board of Education. And that is the kind of world I envision in which finally people are given the opportunity, parents are given the opportunity to choose whether they are rich or poor. The thing that horrifies me about American education today is that the people who are preyed upon most by the existing system are poor folks, people of color who live in big cities, trapped in these politicized, bureaucratized school systems, unable to make the choices that middle-class people make because they can afford a residence. We have a choice system today in this country. It goes by the name of buy a house, buy a school.
Sure, that's what my book's
it's
about.
horribly,
Sure.
horribly unfair. And so it's not just a matter of school improvement that I think that choice is a good idea, but I also think it's a matter of equity.
But to open the education market to the private sector, to private schools, troubles me profoundly. It worries me enormously for a lot of reasons. First of all, to use an old-fashioned metaphor, I mean, if you want to improve the public water supply, you don't do it by starting private reservoirs, because then the people who have access to the private reservoir won't worry about the water that the peasants are still drinking. So that worries me profoundly. And it's not just education. Opening vouchers to the private market is really part of a larger pattern that we've seen in the past 10 years, the whole thrust towards privatizing. I mean, this, you know, the whole Milton Friedman idea that the private sector always does a better job than the public sector. If you look at private sector services in ghetto communities in the United States, I don't think you would ever support that notion. For example, have you ever tried to get a mortgage in a slum neighborhood? I have, because I lived in the Boston ghetto. The private banking system is a grotesque anomaly in the ghettos of America. The
grocery stores are much more expensive.
The grocery stores. I was just going to ask you, I used to have to buy my meat and milk and produce in a ghetto private enterprise grocery store. Cost more, rotten. Private doctor. Have you ever tried to get a dentist?
There's a very simple explanation for this.
But that's the private market.
Yeah. Let me explain. The problem that private enterprise faces in poor areas is that people are poor. People don't have money. In our public Medicaid system, people get less because Medicaid doesn't pay sufficiently to purchase what they need.
Medicaid is a kind of voucher system, is it not?
Well, a very, very limited
kind.
A
bad voucher system. Yeah.
Exactly. The key to making choice work for everybody is to design a system where poor people actually have the resources that are necessary to make a choice. That means if you're going to have choice that goes out of the public school system, it's important that the government be willing to support in a very substantial way the ability of poor people to make the same choices as everybody else. In our book, we recommended that not only resources be equalized in a choice system and that rich people not be able to top off their vouchers with private money and generate inequity, but we recommended that poor people be given additional resources.
Because their needs are greater.
Because their needs are greater, exactly. Yeah. If people are genuinely empowered economically to make choices, then the schools will certainly be there. For example, if you believe in public school choice and you really believe in the power of the choice mechanism, then you must be willing as a public school administrator to say, nobody wants to go to that school over there. We're going to have to do something about that. Either we're going to have to close it, we're going to have to move those personnel out, but public school choice has to respect the decisions of parents.
Let me ask a couple of very specific questions. If students are given vouchers, can the schools then pick and choose among the students with the vouchers? Isn't the choice then the choice of the school?
They always do. They always do, no matter what restrictions exist. No matter how we say the schools will be open to everybody, the schools are always selective because there are ways of being selective even while seeming open. You can simply refuse to offer services for kids with grave difficulties, for example.
I do think that there has to be a safety net procedure to guarantee that everybody receives a school of choice. Let me just make one final point about this. It always perplexes me that when people think about a choice environment and the kinds of decisions that schools would make, that they assume that schools will always insist on trying to educate and trying to accept only the easiest to educate kids, only the best kids, so to speak. I think that if you're going to operate a school in a neighborhood where kids have difficulties, if you want to make it as a school, you focus on kids with difficulties. I don't see any reason why educators,
at
least educators I know,
are
interested in all kinds of kids.
See, I disagree with you there. That's sort of the notion that you've spoken about in your writing, where you spoke of sort of different schools serving different children differently. I'm worried that that will open the floodgates to re-intensified segregation of our schools. In fact, ask yourself this question. Under an absolutely open voucher system, what rich white parent will ever freely choose to send their children to a school with poor black kids? It will never happen. Despite all your good intentions and your integrity, I believe that the largest sector of support for vouchers in the United States is basically a sector of people who are traditionally bitterly opposed to desegregation and profoundly racist. And I believe that this, I'm not characterizing you, so let me finish.
You've spoken.
No. I believe that this is the motivation for the Bush administration, and I think this is why they've supported it. It panders to the same people who found the Willie Horton ad attractive.
Answer that, John Chubb, or respond to that.
Jonathan, you know that that's patently false. If you look
it's true of the Bush administration. It's not true of you, John.
Am I going to speak?
Sure.
If you look at public opinion polls over the last decade and you ask who is supportive of choice, who is supportive of private school choice, what you find is it's always the same thing. The people who have no choice now, inner city people, racial minorities, those are by far and away the strongest supporters of choice. Suburban people are rather indifferent. Rich people are rather indifferent. In fact, one of the great ironies is that the Republicans are trying to sell this when their constituents really are not that concerned about it, and the Democrats are opposed to it when their folks are crying out for it.
I want to ask both of you on this issue of parochial schools. In parochial schools, religious instruction is mandatory. If we provide public funding for children to choose parochial schools who are not of that faith, are they going to be required to attend the religious indoctrination?
Well, it's really up to the parents whether they want to place their kid in a religious school or not. If they place their child in a religious school, then they will take religious classes. But that's their choice. People make that choice all the time.
If you don't think choice will work, what will work to equalize public education?
I think for the first time in America, we ought to create truly democratic schools by abolishing the present funding system, which is based upon local property tax, which is inherently unjust, inherently unfair, because it rewards the people whose folks have the most expensive homes with the most expensive schools,
and
replace it by an equitable funding system on a national basis deriving from a federal income tax. There is no other ethical way to do it.
New Jersey and Texas have both tried to equalize education and are failing.
Well, that's because it's
because of political opposition.
And it's because it's been done only at the local level. We have not had a president who took the leadership and said, these savage inequalities are intolerable, I'm going to change it.
But people nationwide do not want more taxes for anything.
We needn't have more taxes if we abolish the property tax
if we
and
took the taxes that we had
it
now
by an income
and we
tax.
equalize.
You agree on that,
If
do
we
you
took, how you do it,
sure.
I think is open to debate. But I do think that every child in America ought to have the same financial resources. But I am not in favor of equalizing resources within the system we have right now, which squanders resources on bureaucratic expenditures and creates an environment in which good schools can't thrive and in which parents and teachers aren't honored.
Thank you very much, John Chubb and Jonathan Kozol. And thanks to the young people at the Educational Video Center who produced that report. Let's take a closer look at exactly what the candidates have to say